France's colonial history in Africa casts a long shadow. For centuries, the French Empire stretched across the continent. This left a legacy of economic dependence. Even after independence, France maintained significant control over its former colonies. This essay will delve into the mechanisms of this control. We will explore its far-reaching consequences. The establishment of the CFA franc in 1945 marked a turning point. This seemingly benign monetary policy became a tool for continued economic dominance. This system tied the economies of newly independent African nations to France, effectively undermining their ability to chart their own economic course. The CFA franc is just one facet of France's neo-colonial project in Africa. Political interference, military interventions, and economic exploitation have all played their part. This has come at a high cost for African nations. This essay will explore these issues in detail, shedding light on a system that has too often been shrouded in secrecy. The CFA franc, created in 1945, stands as a stark symbol of France's enduring influence in Africa. This monetary system tied the economies of 14 former French colonies to the French franc. It later became linked to the euro. While proponents argue it brought stability, critics see it as a tool of economic control. This has hindered the development of these African nations. Under this system, member states were obligated to deposit a significant portion of their foreign reserves into the French treasury. This provision severely limited their financial autonomy. It hindered their ability to invest in crucial sectors like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Furthermore, the fixed exchange rate with the French franc and later the euro made exports from these African nations less competitive. This perpetuated their dependence on raw material exports. It stifled industrialization and economic diversification. Despite reforms in recent years, including the introduction of the ECO, the core elements of the CFA franc system remain intact. France still guarantees the convertibility of the currency. This ensures its continued influence over the monetary policies of these African nations. The CFA franc system has had a profound and often detrimental impact on the economic development of its member states. By limiting their control over monetary policy, the system has created a number of obstacles to growth and prosperity. One of the most significant impacts has been the perpetuation of economic dependence on France. The requirement to deposit a large portion of their foreign reserves in the French treasury left these nations with limited funds for domestic investment. This hindered their ability to develop their own industries and infrastructure. The fixed exchange rate, while providing a degree of stability, also made exports from these countries less competitive in the global market. This has made it difficult for them to diversify their economies beyond raw materials. It has also hindered their ability to attract foreign investment. Moreover, the CFA franc system has been criticized for stifling regional integration within Africa. The requirement to prioritize trade with France has hampered the development of intra-African trade. This has slowed down the emergence of a strong and unified African market. France's influence in Africa extends far beyond the economic realm. Since independence, France has consistently interfered in the political affairs of its former colonies. This has often been done to protect its economic and strategic interests in the region. One of the most blatant ways France has exerted its influence is through its support for autocratic leaders who are amenable to French interests. This support has often come in the form of military aid, financial assistance, and diplomatic cover. France has also been accused of orchestrating coups and destabilizing governments that challenge its hegemony. This pattern of interference has undermined democratic processes in the region. It has perpetuated a cycle of instability and conflict. The shadowy network of French intelligence operatives, military officials, and business elites, often referred to as Francafrique, has played a key role in maintaining France's grip on power in its former colonies. This opaque network operates with little accountability. It has been implicated in numerous human rights abuses. Section 5. Echoes of Empire military interventions in Africa. France's military presence in Africa is another stark reminder of its colonial past. Since the 1960s, France has intervened militarily in Africa over 50 times. These interventions have been justified on various grounds. These include protecting French citizens, combating terrorism, and restoring order. However, critics argue that these interventions are often driven by a desire to maintain France's sphere of influence in the region. They point to the fact that these interventions often coincide with threats to French economic interests, such as access to natural resources or strategic infrastructure. The 2013 intervention in Mali, for instance, was launched ostensibly to combat Islamist militants. However, it also served to secure France's access to uranium mines in neighboring Niger. Similarly, France's long-standing military presence in Côte d'Ivoire has been linked to its interests in the country's cocoa and coffee industries. These military interventions have come at a high cost, both in terms of human life and financial resources. They have also fueled instability and resentment in the region. This has further complicated the already challenging task of nation-building in these countries. Section 6. The spoils of exploitation. French multinationals in Africa. French multinational corporations have long held a dominant position in the economies of France's former African colonies. These companies, often with the backing of the French government, have exploited Africa's vast natural resources and cheap labor for decades. From oil and gas to mining and agriculture, French companies have profited immensely from their operations in Africa. However, these profits have often come at the expense of local populations, who have seen little benefit from the extraction of their country's resources. One of the most egregious examples of this exploitation is the case of Areva, a French multinational specializing in nuclear energy. Areva has been accused of extracting uranium from Niger for decades, while leaving behind a legacy of environmental degradation and public health problems. Similarly, the Bolloré Group, a French conglomerate with interests in logistics, plantations and media, has been criticized for its labor practices and environmental record in Cameroon and other African countries. These companies have often operated with impunity, exploiting weak regulatory frameworks and corrupt officials to maximize their profits. Section 7. Environmental degradation, the unseen cost. The environmental costs of France's economic exploitation of Africa are often overlooked. However, they are no less real or devastating for the communities that bear the brunt of these impacts. From deforestation and pollution to climate change, the environmental consequences of French companies' activities in Africa are far-reaching. For instance, the expansion of palm oil plantations in countries like Cameroon, often driven by French companies, has led to widespread deforestation. This has resulted in the loss of biodiversity, increased carbon emissions, and displacement of local communities. Similarly, mining operations, often run by French companies, have contaminated water sources, polluted the air, and damaged ecosystems. The long-term health consequences for communities living near these mines can be severe, including respiratory problems, birth defects, and cancer. As the world grapples with the urgent need to address climate change, it is essential to recognize the role that French companies have played in contributing to environmental degradation in Africa. Holding these companies accountable for their actions and promoting sustainable practices is crucial for ensuring a healthy planet for future generations. Section 8. A rising tide resistance and reform in Francophone Africa. In recent years, there has been growing resistance to France's neo-colonial policies in Africa. From grassroots movements to political parties, Africans are increasingly demanding an end to French interference and a more equitable relationship based on mutual respect and cooperation. One of the most prominent examples of this resistance is the rise of anti-CFA franc movements across West and Central Africa. These movements, led by activists, economists and politicians, are calling for a break from the CFA franc system. They argue that it is time for African countries to have full control over their monetary policies and economic destinies. In addition to the CFA franc, there is growing anger over France's military interventions in the region. Many Africans view these interventions as a continuation of colonial-era policies designed to protect French interests, rather than promote peace and stability. This resentment has fueled anti-French sentiment and led to calls for the closure of French military bases in Africa. Furthermore, there is increasing scrutiny of the activities of French multinational corporations in Africa. Civil society organizations, human rights groups, and investigative journalists are playing a crucial role in exposing the exploitative practices of these companies. They're demanding greater transparency and accountability. Section 9. Winds of Change, a new era for Africa. The growing resistance to France's neo-colonial policies in Africa is part of a broader shift in the geopolitical landscape. The rise of new global powers, such as China, has provided African countries with alternative sources of investment and partnership. This has given them more leverage to negotiate better terms with their former colonial masters. At the same time, there is a growing sense of Pan-Africanism and a desire for greater integration and cooperation among African countries. This has led to the creation of regional organizations and initiatives aimed at promoting trade, investment and development within Africa. These developments suggest that a new era may be dawning for Africa, one in which the continent is no longer beholden to its former colonial powers. However, significant challenges remain. Overcoming the legacy of colonialism, addressing poverty and inequality, and building strong democratic institutions will require sustained effort and commitment from both African leaders and the international community. The path ahead will not be easy, but the winds of change are blowing, and there is hope that Africa can finally break free from the shackles of its past and achieve its full potential.